listeners. You've tuned in to Dreadwave FM, where the static hums with secrets and the dark has a voice. Tonight, I bring you something different. 3 stories plucked from the shadowed corners of the internet. They say truth is stranger than fiction. But when the lights are low and the whispers begin, does it even matter? These tales come from those who claim to have lived them. But I'll let you decide. Just be warned, some stories don't like to be forgotten. Settle in, dear listeners, and let's begin. I grew up in a small town near the Mexico border. It wasn't exactly the safest place. My family had warned me countless times about human and drug traffickers in the area. Maybe that's why I always kept my guard up. Maybe that's what saved me. I was 14 at the time, a high school freshman, and that night, my best friend and I had decided to take a walk at the local park. It was a popular place, just a short distance from both our houses. We'd been there dozens of times before, so we didn't think twice about going. As we wandered along the paths, chatting about nothing in particular, a man approached us. He looked to be in his 40s, with a strange smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He told us he was new in town and needed directions. Immediately, my friend and I exchanged a glance, a silent agreement to stay on guard. We answered politely but briefly, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. He didn't. Instead, he started asking us questions. Harmless at first. Do you go to the middle school down the street? Something about the way he phrased it made my stomach twist. I told him no, that we were in high school, but I didn't say which one. The idea that this man thought we were even younger than we were, and still felt comfortable approaching us, set off alarm bells in my head. And then I saw it. Over his shoulder, a second man was following us. I wouldn't have even noticed him if the first guy hadn't smirked, just slightly, after I confirmed that we were underage. It was like a signal, a confirmation. The second man kept his head low, wearing a cap that shadowed his face. He didn't look at us directly, but he stayed close. Too close. My friend and I tried to keep walking, but the first man wouldn't let up. His questions kept coming, circling back to our town, our routines where we like to hang out. Then, he asked for our phone numbers. This was almost 10 years ago. Smartphones existed, but we didn't have them. I had an old flip phone, barely useful for anything beyond calls and texts. My friend quickly lied, saying she didn't have a phone. I knew I couldn't use the same excuse since I had just been fidgeting with mine. I don't really give out my number, I said, trying to sound casual. Oh, come on, he pushed, his tone shifting. It's just a number. You girls can show me around town. I made up some excuse about having limited texts and minutes. He didn't like that. And then I realized something terrifying. The sky had darkened. We had been stuck in this conversation for too long, afraid to make a move. The park, once lively with families and joggers, was now eerily empty. We needed to leave. I forced a smile, nudging my friend. It's getting late, we should head home. We turned toward the park's exit, our pace quickening. But he wasn't done. I can drive you, he offered, motioning toward the parking lot. No need to walk alone at night. My pulse spiked. I shook my head. It's fine. We live close by. That was a lie. Our houses were at least 5 long blocks away. A solid 20-minute walk. Come on, he insisted. It's not safe for young girls to be walking around alone. And that's when I noticed. The second man had closed the distance. He was just a few steps behind us now, no longer pretending to be uninvolved. Nope. I grabbed my friend's arm. It was nice meeting you, I blurted out, forcing politeness into my voice as I turned and bolted. We power walked across the street, our bodies tense, waiting for the sound of footsteps behind us. But they didn't follow. Not on foot, anyway. Just as we started to relax, a van turned onto the street ahead. It was them. They were on the opposite side of the road now, driving slow, watching us. Their heads turned in unison as they passed. At the end of the block, they made a sharp turn. We froze. They're gonna come back, my friend whispered. I made a snap decision. Cross the street, now. We darted across, our hearts pounding. It was the right call. The van reappeared, crawling back down the street, right where we had been just moments before. If we hadn't moved, they would have pulled up right next to us. We needed cover. There were no stores, no alleyways, just a row of houses. We spotted a car parked in a driveway and crouched behind it, praying the owners wouldn't come out and ask questions. An old woman stood at her front door, watching us with suspicion. She didn't say a word, just turned her gaze to the street. The van passed by again, slower this time. We couldn't see the men inside, but we could feel them looking. Finally, after what felt like forever, the van disappeared around the corner. The old woman's voice broke the silence. "They're gone. You should be good now." We didn't stick around to thank her. We ran. I made sure my friend got home safely before sprinting the last 2 blocks to my own house, my lungs burning, my eyes scanning every street, every parked car. By the time I slammed my front door shut and locked every bolt, I was shaking. I never saw those men again. But to this day, I know in my gut, if we had hesitated for even a moment longer, if we had walked to the parking lot instead of running, we wouldn't have made it home that night. I was 19 when it happened. It was the summer before I transferred to a university out of state, and I was savoring the last few months of freedom before real responsibilities kicked in. I had just finished a late shift at the diner where I worked, a small family-owned spot that catered mostly to truckers and locals. My car was in the shop, so I had to walk the 3 miles home, something I'd done plenty of times before. It was just after midnight. The town was quiet, the air thick with humidity, and the occasional streetlight buzzed with moths. I had my earbuds in, music playing low, just enough to fill the silence, but not drown out my surroundings. About a mile into my walk, I noticed a gray sedan idling at the curb up ahead. Its headlights were off, but the engine was running. That alone wasn't weird. Maybe someone was waiting for a friend or checking directions. But as I got closer, I could feel it. That heavy, crawling feeling of being watched. I stole a glance toward the driver's seat. A man, 40s maybe. Pale skin, sunken eyes. He wasn't looking at a phone or fumbling with the radio. He was looking at me. Directly at me. I swallowed down the uneasy feeling and kept walking, trying not to make it obvious that I'd noticed him. But as I passed, I heard the soft creak of a car door opening. "Hey," a voice called. Deep, casual, too friendly. "You got a second?" I didn't. But stopping felt safer than ignoring him completely. Just for a moment. I turned slightly, keeping my distance. What's up?" The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm new in town. Looking for directions." Bullshit. No one asks for directions at midnight in a deserted neighborhood. "Sorry, I don't really know the area that well," I lied, shifting my weight, ready to bolt if I had to. "Aw, come on," he said, stepping halfway out of the car. "You live around here, don't you? Just need a little help." A nervous chuckle slipped out before I could stop it. "Sorry, I really gotta get home." I turned and started walking faster. Then I heard him shut the car door. "Hold on, sweetheart," he called after me, his voice still coated in fake friendliness. But now there was something else beneath it. Something heavier. I didn't stop. My heart pounded as I walked faster, practically speed walking. That's when I heard the crunch of his footsteps behind me. Panic surged through my veins. I pulled out my phone, fumbling with it as I pretended to make a call. "Yeah, Dad, I'm almost home," I said, loud enough for him to hear. "Yeah, I see you waiting outside. I'll be there in like 5 minutes." The footsteps slowed, then stopped. I glanced over my shoulder. He was standing there, watching me, his lips pressed into a thin line. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to his car. I thought it was over. It wasn't. As soon as I reached the next block, I heard the low hum of an engine behind me. The gray sedan, moving slow, following. I turned a corner, walking faster, but the car turned too. I was still blocks away from home, and suddenly the streets felt too empty. Too quiet. Then up ahead, a gas station. Bright lights, a cashier inside, a safe place. I broke into a run. The car sped up. I sprinted into the gas station, practically crashing into the counter. "Hey, I think someone's following me." I gasped. The cashier, an older guy with a cigarette hanging from his lip, narrowed his eyes and looked past me. The gray sedan had slowed in the parking lot, idling for just a few seconds, before rolling forward and disappearing into the night. The The cashier clicked his tongue. You know that guy? No, I said, my voice unsteady. Never seen him before. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I'd get a ride home if I were you. After stating the obvious, I waited inside until a friend came to pick me up. I never saw that gray sedan again, but even years later, whenever I walk alone at night, I can still feel it, that heavy, crawling sense of being watched. To the man in the gray sedan, let's not meet ever again. I'm writing this on behalf of my little sister because, frankly, she's too paranoid to put it out there herself. But after everything she's told me, I think it's worth sharing. She's been living in the same apartment complex for almost 3 years. It's a nice place, clean, well-maintained, the kind of community where you wouldn't expect to feel unsafe. But lately, she's been uneasy, and it all comes down to one of the maintenance guys. At first, it seemed harmless. She'd run into him in the mornings, usually on her way out for a walk. Nothing unusual about that, except it happened almost every time. It didn't matter what time she left. Early morning, late morning, sometimes even on her lunch break. There he was. 8 times out of 10, she'd step outside, and he'd just be there. She told me he was friendly at first, maybe a little too eager to help, holding doors open for her, making small talk. She's independent, prefers to handle things on her own, so she found it annoying more than anything. But then, one day, he offered her a ride. She had a package to drop off at the postal service. He must have overheard or somehow knew because he casually suggested driving her there himself. That's when the unease set in. She declined, of course, but from that moment on, she stopped feeling safe. She became hyper-aware of him, and it wasn't just the random run-ins anymore. Over winter break, I visited her, and we kept an eye out. I saw him myself, a little too friendly, the kind of forced niceness that doesn't sit right. No one is that nice. Not realistically. The final straw? Her Ring camera. She'd been checking the footage more often, just out of paranoia. Most of the time it was normal stuff. People walking by, neighbors coming and going. But then, there was him. She caught him on video, walking past her door. At first, nothing strange. He had an excuse, maintenance work on the floor maybe. But then, there was another clip. This time, he walked right up to her door and then hesitated. He didn't knock, didn't press the doorbell. He just stood there for a second, then turned and walked away. Almost like he'd changed his mind at the last second. She took it to the property manager, but they brushed it off. That's just how he is, they said. He's friendly. No, too friendly. She's planning to move out by August. In the meantime, I told her to keep an eye on that